Hello, my name is Nick, and I'm working on a project that measures the spillover effects from the conflict in Syria, and I use a synthetic control model. The idea is that there's four countries bordering Syria that I'm interested in looking at, and I want to look at how large these spillover effects are, if they exist, and also at what time periods do they occur, and are these two things different for each country. So I look at Jordan, Israel, Lebanon, and Turkey bordering Syria, and I take the war in Syria as a treatment, and I want to see what is the impact of the treatment on these bordering countries. So there's only a little bit of literature on conflict in economics, and the motivation of this paper is to add to that literature by looking at the spillover effects economically onto bordering countries. And this is an interesting case study because we have four countries not at war bordering a country that is at war. So I can also compare the differences in these four countries. So the most important papers on conflict are mostly coming from Collier and Hoffler, and their most notable paper is on the economic causes of civil war. Some other important papers are listed here. The Murdochs and Sanders is probably the most related to what I'm doing, looking at the spillover effects of civil wars. And they do a regional comparison. For example, they look at civil wars in sub-Saharan Africa, as well as parts of Asia and Latin America. But to the best of my knowledge, the Middle East has not been looked at yet. Murdoch and Sander also mentions that there's some issues using OLS, especially in Latin American and Asian countries where degrees of freedom were limited. So my synthetic control model can help overcome these limitations. The Dunn and Tien paper looks at primarily African countries, and it confirms that there's negative impacts, and just the presence of conflict alone creates significant spillover effects. So my contribution is to take an area that has not been considered yet, Syria, and also introduce a new model to overcome the limitations of other papers. And by doing this, I can look at what is the economic impact of civil wars and add to the knowledge base. So using a synthetic control paper, it's made popular by Al-Badi and Diamond. They've looked at the reunion of Germany and what the economic impact of that was, as well as a tobacco control program in California, and also episodes of terrorist attacks over in the Basque country of Spain. So I'll be using that same model, but taking the war in Syria as the treatment instead of the reunion of Germany or the tobacco treatment program. So some other papers that followed Al-Badi's model was looking at liberalization episodes. There is a kind of replication study on the David Card paper on the Marion Boatlet, and there's another one by Rand Corporation. So why do I use a synthetic control model? That's because there's not another country that is close enough to one of my treated countries to do a difference in difference. And also there's limitations to doing ordinary least squares. That's discussed more in the Al-Badi papers. You can look at those. And so how do I use a synthetic control model? What I want to do is create a pool of donor countries. And the idea is that this pool of donor countries are going to be similar to the country of interest. I have four countries of interest, but I'll use Jordan as an example. I want to have a pool of countries that are similar to Jordan, and I can attribute different weights between 0 and 1 to each country in the pool to create a synthetic Jordan. And this is what it looks like. So I have a pool of donor countries, and of that pool, the synthetic control model took 29.5% Guyana, a little bit of Malaysia, about a quarter of Panama, a third of Senegal, and a little bit of Belize and Bhutan. And see the actual Jordan here, the GDP per capita compared to my synthetic Jordan is pretty close, as well as capital formation, industry, share of the economy, inflation, the population of my synthetic and my actual Jordan, as well as the trade openness. And the war in Syria occurs in 2011, so 2010 is the last year of not having the treatment. So I have my dotted synthetic control model, as well as the trend of what actually happened. And these are pretty close together prior to the treatment. And so I want to try to measure the effect of the treatment, the war in Syria, on Jordan by comparing what would have happened if the treatment had not occurred to what actually happened. Now, this could have just happened by chance, so we need to do some inference. And the way I'm going to do inference for my synthetic control model is by doing a placebo test.